Hello and welcome to the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast with me, Clive Barber, and my good mate, Noel Tom. For the days when you can't ride your bike, there's always the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast. Welcome back to our 100th episode, and this is part 2, but this is the main event. Let's see how it unfolds.
Hello.
Hello.
Caught me eating my boiled egg.
He's got some motorcycles.
Noel's famous Honda Museum.
Jeez, I can see, I think it's an XLV, am I looking at?
That's an XL 600 from about 86, 87. And that's an XR 650L. I always tell people, Adam, that the only place you can get an XR 650L is in California or Australia. Is that true?
A 650 XR 650L. Yeah, we had those.
Well, this one, the red one, they've been making that since 91 and they're still making it. And they've just changed it from red to white. That's the only change they've ever made.
Hang on, that's an XL, did you say?
Twin headlight one is the old XL. That's the really old one. And the red one's the XR 650L, same engine as a Dominator.
Ah, so it's not the water-cooled 650 XR.
No,
this is some other thing.
Yeah.
Just before my time.
Oh, what?
Yeah, wow.
I think we've got a few years on you.
Maybe I should know, but XR 600s, I mean, the twin carby XR 350s, XR 500s I was just a kid, into 80cc two-strokes back then when those things were around. But the XRs first come onto my radar was the 250s, and then in 98, I bought XR 600 and rode it around Australia. Lived on the thing. That's kind of embedded some of that Honda bulletproofness into me. So I'll always have a soft spot for the Hondas, the old ones.
Was that fairly trouble-free motoring on that XR 600?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. I actually rode it across, lived on it, camping, just nomad style. And then raced the Australian 4-day Enduro Championships on it. Decided that it's funny because I actually quit racing for a while to travel. And then while I was traveling, sort of got the bug back and I'd preempted it. And the standard 10-litre tank, I'd shipped it across Australia because I ordered one of those Clark 21-litre tanks for it. So it was quite a bloated adventure bike almost, but not really. I didn't even really know what adventure was back then. I was just doing it. I was traveling on a motorbike, but you didn't actually give it a name. You didn't give it a category. And then by the time I hit Tasmania, I don't know if you know geographically, Perth to the other side of Australia is 4,000 kilometres. I tried to get on a ship to Tasmania, and I was from Melbourne basically. I was at this place called Port Phillip Bay trying to wing it, had no money, I was 23 years old. It was like I was in the 1950s or something, trying to do work for the ship or something and let me roll my sleeping bag out on the deck. There was no way that was ever going to happen. So they knocked me back and I thought, well, screw this. I'm not paying for a ticket. I'll use that money for an entry for the Australian Enduro Championship. So I pointed the thing north and did some training in the snow country, Alpine Ranges in Victoria, which is, the bottom right-hand corner of Australia. And then about 3-4 weeks later, I was racing the Australian 4-day. It's basically 4-day. You could compare it to the International 6-day, except it's the Australian Championships and it's 4 days, same kind of format. I'd put 11,000 Ks on that XR, which is nothing, ran it in. And then did the Aussie Championships on that bike. Got, I don't know, silver medal and 5th or 6th place in the class, and spent. Have you guys ever heard of Ballard's Off-Road? Jeff Ballard.
Yeah.
Ballard's XRs only. He took a shining to the whole. It was his whole business at that point, and I met him just through showing up to this town where the 4-day was being held. And, one thing led to another. And it's like this crazy West Australian has, and they thought that I'd just specifically ridden across the country to race that event. They didn't realise that I was I was off racing when I left, but then missed it by the time I got to the East Coast, and then decided, it's on, I'll go and enter. And so they made this big deal about it, and Ballard took an interest, and next thing he's thrown me some Wolf gear. You guys must remember that Wolf gear. Yeah. Is that still around?
Yeah.
Do they make that stuff?
Not far from us, is it? Wolf Sport?
Yeah.
Cumbria.
Kitted us up in some Wolf gear and put a few of his performance bits on, and that kind of maybe an inkling sort of put me on the radar for the whole moto media thing. It didn't happen straight away, but that was one of the stepping stones on my journey towards this whole media thing.
I think the really exciting thing about your journey, Adam, and we'll maybe talk about this. Sorry, guys, if you haven't realised already, it's only bloody Adam Reimann, all the way from Australia. Fuck's sake. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us on board.
No, you're welcome. We've been talking since about September 22, I think, when you were filming the Warhorse film in Norway and Europe. And so we've kind of had that conversation. You were going to ride the Warhorse into my studio.
I know. I was threatening to actually rock up and ride it into the building and park it.
It would have been difficult. It's a tiny bedroom on the second floor, but you're welcome to try.
That was really cool that you contacted me, because I was sitting somewhere in Norway at the time, and I thought, what's this trail? Hang on, what is it? What's the name of this show? Trail.
It just flows off the lips, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I had to Google it and checked it, and I listened to a few, and I thought, who are these old geezers? It just that intro twang that you've got going, that little thing, it's so English. Because we were raised on a lot of English shows like Fawlty Towers and that sort of thing, right? And I'm listening to this podcast sort of wind up, and it's, I don't know, 2-3 minutes in, you dropped a couple of F-bombs, and I thought, these guys are all right. They actually sound like they know what they're talking about. They're talking about every single dirt bike on the planet. I thought, they're the real deal. And judging by what parked behind you there, Noel, you guys live bikes.
You've had a couple of XRV 750s as well, haven't you, Noel? Possibly more than 2.
I've been going through your films again this week, Adam, and I've had that Africa Twin ringing in my ears, and now through that Akrapovic, even better. I bought one because a friend, Chris Bright, called in to see me, and he's had a cup of tea, and as he rode out of my yard, I heard this thing fire up, and I just thought, fuck, I've got to get one of these, purely off the sound of it. Joy listening again.
Adam's done the same thing as you, though. He's bought one, and he's just bought another one. And this is what Noel does. He buys a bike, decides he likes it, and he likes it so much, he always buys a second one.
I see the odd enthusiast, and they've got these classic, exotic machines that have been restored, and they look the part. I don't think I would ever do that. Because even when I finished restoring the Warhorse, once I got it back to Australia, it actually looked pretty good, like it was something that you would park in your lounge room and just admire it. I'm so glad I just went and did the 14,500 Ks around Australia straight after it. It just took it in its stride. Kind of made a promise to myself, well, you don't want to bin it when you're in the middle of Australia by yourself. Who cares about the bike? You just don't want to put yourself in that position. Basically, doing all those Ks, it's funny, because the wear and tear that would put on any motorcycle, it's a credit to how well those things are built. They're built like a truck. You guys know dirt bikes, like motocross bikes, for example. You can get your KX250 or a CR250 or whatever. If you've done a season of motocross or enduro or whatever, the whole linkages in the shock, they get a bit loose. You grab the seat and you lift it up, and there's a little notch there. You think, all right, I'll put some new bearing kit in the linkage. And you do it, and you get the new bearings, and you whack them in there, and then the wheel, the rear wheel and the swing arm and everything's just super tight, right? Great. You go do a 5-minute moto, come back, and it's just duk, 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 duk. It's moving again instantly. When I got the Warhorse, the XRV 750 back from Europe, when I did the strip down and powder coated the frame, I didn't replace any of the linkages, any of the bearings in the linkages. I took them out, I cleaned them, I greased them, and they hadn't come out of there since the factory 30 years ago. No one had done it. Greased them up, put it back in, and that back wheel, that whole rear wheel and linkage system and swing arm, there's not a millimetre of play in it. 14,500 Ks later, pounding it around Australia, hot desert roads, potholes, bull dust, just hammered the thing. Get home, put it on the centre stand, grab the rear wheel. To this day, it's sitting over there, and there's not that level of metallurgy and the bearing, even if I was to buy, say, aftermarket bearings for the thing now, you're probably not going to get the same quality, and they're just going to wear out quicker than the old ones that are in it. A lot of people sort of question why I didn't fully rebuild the motor. Like, I did the top end since coming back from around Australia. And I don't know, if you've owned some old Hondas and you get your hand on the rod and shake a few things around, have a bit of a feel, it's like, don't touch it. I got a 2007 CR250 in the shed as well, original bottom end. You could just keep flogging it, putting pistons on top of it. There's I don't know. There's just a different.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? One of the Ducati guy. What was the guy's name who helped you with the rebuild? He said it's not magic, it's engineering.
Exactly right. He sort of was referencing the whole concept of the V there and the nature of just the power delivery, and I think that's kind of what has half sucked me into that bike. Is just coming from a single cylinder background, racing motocross enduro, and just lived on single cylinders my whole life, to then coming of age. And I have done quite a bit on the twin cylinder stuff, adventure bike stuff in the last 10 years, but it's purely because of manufacturer opportunity, shooting the KTM rallies, BMW safaris, doing the video shoots for KTM, there was a point there I would say I'd have done more Ks on big bikes than a lot of people I know, and I'd never even owned one, and I hadn't had to. And so the irony that the first adventure bike that I'd ever owned, pay for with my own money, was a 31-year-old XRV that I fatefully found in Norway.
How did you find it? Was it did you find it on the internet, or was it through a friend?
Yeah, so it was 20, we've only just gone into 24, so it was 22. Organised a bunch of projects with KTM with the factory in Austria, just content collaboration. There was a while there, especially in the whole Moto Nomad era on the 500 EXEs, you could have been forgiven for thinking that I was on the books with KTM, but I never have been. It's always been like a collaboration, if you like. I've obviously got individual sponsors, Pirelli and Modal and Alpine Stars and all that business. But in terms of motorcycle manufacturer, I've always remained independent, so I can ride anything, and it kind of works. On this occasion, halfway through 2022, I'd propositioned the factory to do a bunch of videos in Europe, and they're like, yeah, all good, come over and this bike and this country. And I must have done four videos of the 1290, 890, 500 EXCs. I did a ride with Giovanni Sala in Italy and cobbled together a few videos. And anyway, because I was there in Europe, they were like, oh, well, while you're here, you can ride the new 890 rally for us, 890R for us. We'll give you a bit of a scoop on the content. So I was just the Stig action rider wearing their gear. Did the video, and then they gave me all the footage after and said, don't release anything before this date, and then you can have the scoop first review. And I was just like, wow, that's pretty cool. It was like, it was all a bit privileged, to be honest, and that kind of is what made me go, this content plan in Europe, it's a big deal to just uproot my family and go to Europe for 4 months. I sort of wanted to have the income side of it covered. And for whatever reason, I left the second half of it open. So I didn't have any projects locked in with any manufacturer. I knew that I was going to be spending the second half of that in Norway. And so I thought, well, maybe I could organise a Ducati or a T7 or a whatever. And after the 890 video, the official KTM one, it's like, oh, and there he goes. He's off on some new bike to the Arctic Circle. Like, what a wanker sort of thing. And I thought, no, I need to restore faith in the people, And I thought, I'm not going to organise anything. I'll just get to Norway, just start looking on their used bikes website, which is fin.com or something. And that was it. The whole point was to find something as old as I could. The older, the better. It just had to be some, rickety old thing that I was going to ride to the top of the world. And within 3 days of getting there, because that was the other thing, I thought, well, I can't just be in Europe twiddling my thumbs. I need a bike. I need to be shooting. I need to be making content. And it was a little bit of a punt, a little bit of a risk. But it's funny how it all come together. Incidentally, my brother-in-law lives in Norway. So we basically hit the ground running. I got there to Arendal, which is like that fictitious town in the Frozen movie. It's actually a real town. And we're on this fin.com and I started narrowing down. I'll be honest, I knew the name Africa Twin, but only because of the new models. Like I'd never even seen or none of these things were on my radar, none of them. In fact, what I actually wanted a KTM 950 Super Enduro because I actually rode one of those at Erzberg. Remember they had the King's class at Erzberg where you do the twin cylinder race up the hill? Anyway, so I narrowed it down to one of them. It was a KTM 950 Super Enduro. There was a Super Tenere XTZ 1990 model, and they were long shots because one was in Sweden. The KTM was still too expensive. It was a long shot. And then there was a couple of these Africa Twins on there. Again, I knew the name only because of the new ones, but I'm looking at these things going, yeah, they're a bit rotund. They're a bit, And there was actually a couple. So I thought, all right, we'll start here. We'll start with this one here. And it had no graphics on it, purple and faded and ugly. And it was cheap. I thought, well, that'll do. It's old. And so my brother-in-law drove me 300 kilometers past Oslo. And yeah, there it was, leaning up against this shed. It was this guy he was a bit of an enthusiast. He had a couple of old Nortons and things. And he bought it as his first attempt at off-road because he was a street bike guy. I just don't think he could handle it. And he just thought, I'll just stick to me Nortons and stay on the street and leave this off-road thing alone. Looking around it, and again, I knew nothing of these bikes. I was not familiar with them at all. And it was a pig, to be honest. It was just fat and so heavy and low to the ground and just faded and rusty. And I thought, well, it's actually quite perfect for what I'm trying to do. It's so, gone from the current model 2023 890R that's not even available yet to this old heap of shit, for lack of a better term. The second I pushed the starter, the way it fired into life and idled, I was shocked. I thought, this thing's brand new. Hasn't even been used, And I was spellbound by that thing then and there. And even at that point, I didn't really give a shit about the bike. It was all about the video. Right, this thing is going to carry me to the Arctic Circle. We're on here. I need to buy it.
Can we just talk a little bit about the film? Because it was a fantastic introduction to the film, wasn't it? Of you turning up, getting out the taxi. And there's just two little details I would love to ask you about. One part of this is that there's a film, and I'm not sure if it's an X-Men film, but at the end of it, the guy turns up at somebody's house, at this old guy's house, buys this lovely old Honda CB that's just been lying in the shed and rides it out. And it's the end of the film. It's him riding out of the barn.
Is it Wolverine?
I think it is. But I wanted to know, what was it like explaining to the taxi driver when he drops you off, look, mate, could you just sit here a while whilst I just walk down, set the camera up, show me walking down, you stay here? Because there must have been some explanation you had to give him as to.
I'll just pull you up right there. I obviously had to recreate that because that part of it, I wouldn't have had that footage. I simply wouldn't have had the intro. I had to recreate exactly what I'm explaining to you. And the only difference there was, instead of a taxi ride, it would have been a very expensive taxi ride, 300 kilometers. It was actually my brother-in-law. And for the record, you can't just rock up to a foreign country, buy a bike and take off. It has to be registered to a resident. Unless I had an address to register it to, I couldn't buy it and legally ride it around that country. So a little bit of creative license there. And the other thing too was I couldn't put the pressure of filming on this complete stranger in their home for two reasons.
You might not have bought the bike for one.
That's right. And it'd be like, oh, this guy needs it. Right, let's just bump it up to 20,000 euro or whatever. But it was funny because my brother-in-law speaks Norwegian, and the guy bought it off a little bit of English, but they just did the deal. I went as the mechanic. So I went completely under the radar. We went as if to buy it for my brother-in-law, and there was not a camera in sight, no, nothing. It was pure, legit, real purchase. Same scenario. It was just under, it was kind of neglected at the back, but this guy had other bikes. Obviously, I recreated the barn scene just to fill in the gaps. And once I got that out of the way, 10,000K journey back to Australia was all organic capture. But if not for recreating that barn scene, I would have just hit the ground running, riding this bike. I didn't want to leave that out of it.
But that was the real barn and the real guy you bought the bike off?
No, that wasn't the actual guy, because it was... And this dude, he was great. He agreed to it.
It must have been a funny moment where you said, look, have you got a dusty sheet we can just put over the bike, and then I can throw the dusty sheet off?
It's funny because I put the bike in there, and then it's like, well, that barn, it's got to be in that barn, And then I parked it there and lined it all up. And if you look at the camera work, how the hell are you going to do that organically, purchasing a bike legit off online anyway? It's just not going to happen without, or you could, but they'd just be like, they'd either say no, or they'd be like, you need this. It's going to cost you 20,000 euro. It's actually funnier. The actual story, how it happens, funnier, because my brother-in-law did the deal, and I was like the mechanic that had to scrutinize the bike. So we had to have this sort of code. And when I started it, it meant nothing to my brother, but he just looked at me like, and I'm trying to pick things wrong with it. That's the role of the mechanic. If ever you go buy secondhand bikes, the guy that knows the bike is trying to find anything to get the price down, right? And we didn't really have to, other than all I had going for it, and he knew. I said to the guy, you've devalued it ripping the Africa Twin off. You've stripped it of its identity. You've devalued it right there. And that's all I really had. And it's rusty or whatever. But the way this thing, it didn't even have a stone chip on it. It was honestly just had been a commuter across 3 countries, because it originated from Germany. They sold it to some guy in Sweden. And then this guy bought it off the guy in Sweden. So it's all as it happened. I just had to recreate the barn scene, or else I simply wouldn't have had that footage. We bought the bike, I paid for it, did the online transaction, had my laptop there, and then this guy was sort of like, well, why is the mechanic paying for it? And once the transaction was gone through, he just threw me under the bus, and he goes, oh, by the way, he's a YouTuber, this and that. And they didn't care. They were stoked. We're connected with them on Facebook, and they've watched the whole journey. I even said to them, I'm riding it to North Cap. And they got worried. They were like, this Australian's crazy. This is not the right bike for that. You can't ride this to North Cap. And I was like, just watch me, sort of thing. This thing's fine.
If the radiator needs pissing in it, I'm prepared to do it.
Yeah, exactly. It probably tarnishes a little bit of the story, but let's be realistic. As if a film crew is just gonna, and it wasn't a film crew. I just set up all the shots, but I was able to do it creatively and in an organised way, and that was within the 2 days of getting back to Arundel. I filmed it blow for blow. Actually got the stickers made up in the local town. Whacked my luggage on. Boom, hit the road. Was on the Tet and in Sweden like by the end of the week. All that production, finding it, purchasing it, coming back, reshooting the barn scene, getting the graphics, loading it up, was all done in the space of like 5 days.
I want to take you back to 2014 and to talk about Moto Nomad a little bit, or the series of Moto Nomad films. I was chatting to Noel earlier saying they were massively significant in my motorcycling brain anyway, because I remember the link going around the various chat groups we were in saying, check out this amazing film. It's also a lot to do with, I think, the way geography in a country affects the way you get to ride, because we're a very small country with an awful lot of rules and regulations about where you can and can't ride, as is most of Europe, really, until you get to Eastern Europe. So the way riding has developed, we're trail riders, because you have to do your work. You have to find out where you can and you can't go. I think it's also linked to your journey from racer journalist to a kind of adventure filmmaker, which is what you may call yourself now. But that's the direction that we all wanted to go. And a friend of ours is another very good filmmaker. But in 2014, obviously Moto Nomad came around, and it's kind of revolutionary, right? You weren't the first to make adventure motorbike films, but the quality, the drone footage. I mean, DJI Phantoms only came out the year before, so I'm guessing you were possibly using one of those. But I don't know what my question is. I just wanted to tell you it was really a formative event in my motorcycling journey. So thank you for that. Tell us a little bit more about Moto Nomad. There's my question.
It all happened because of, and if I wind the clock back to 2012, I did my first actual overseas big international adventure, which was the Himalayan one with my dad. Basically, by the end of that, I thought, I want to do this again, and I want to do it properly. I want to do it with a mate that can actually ride, because there were times when I was like 20, 30 kilometers ahead of my dad, and you just father, son, anyway. But what I'm getting at is I just thought it gave me an insight into actually creating something that was worthy of playing in a cinema. And that, I don't know why I felt that was the driving force. What I created with my dad and a 5D, 7D and a couple of early GoPros, the first ones with the round lens anyway. I thought, wow. And it was a DVD. It came out initially as a DVD on a dirt bike magazine, that Himalayan Hero. So I thought, I want to do this properly. And this is the following year. This is the next year. We rode Moto Nomad in 2013, but the film was released in 2014. It was literally 1 year later, and a mate of mine, and I was conjuring at this point. I think I'd already put the prop out to KTM, because I was dealing with KTM a lot anyway in Australia through racing and the media, and I had all the contacts, and they used to sponsor me when I was racing heavily in Western Australia. Like, I won a few state enduro championships on the western side of the country early in the piece. So I had a good connection with KTM and trust. It's about the bike. Back then, I was just thought, okay, I want to do something big now. The first concept was the KTM factory. I was like, right, I'm going to do this on KTMs. So there's the factory. And then literally is, if you were to draw a radius from the KTM factory and just keep going outwards, spiral outwards until you hit the most significant landmark you could think of, I just kept going out and out and out until I hit the pyramids. And I thought, that's it. I'm going to ride from the KTM factory to the pyramids. So I had a concept then. And I pitched this to Jeff Leask, who was general manager of KTM Australia at the time. He started little murmurs with the factory and just sounding it out just for the bikes. It was just out of the blue. One of my friends that I got along quite well with, he was a racing friend. It's not like we hung out that much, but we raced so much. We're always next weekend after the other. You're chasing the national off-road up and down the east coast of Australia. And so I knew him well enough to know that he would be someone that I could do this ride with without really knowing. You don't know how someone's going to handle those kind of situations until you're in it. But just out of the blue, because of all my YouTube stuff that was happening at the time anyway, and he'd sort of tapered off from racing, and I was just in and out of it the whole time anyway because of the media stuff. He just messaged me on Facebook and says, Adam, love your YouTube vids, man. So sick. If you ever need a property to shoot some stuff when you're down in Victoria, just come over and we'll get into it. And I was like, well, have I got a proposition for you? And I fired this whole, exactly that. We're going to ride, you're going to ride over my shoulder with the GoPro from the KTM factory to the pyramids. Are you in? And he just thought I was, he thought, what? For real? What do you mean? Where are we getting these bikes from? So don't worry about that. And that all happened. So he was on board. Conceptually, it all came together in terms of, we had the bikes supplied by the factory, helping us with KTM Australia, was helping us with flights. And in terms of the actual story and where we would go, I would just pinpoint locations on Google Maps and quite ignorantly just plotted a course. at the time, one of the gnarliest areas of the planet you could ever think to ride or attempt to ride through.
So that was when the whole Syrian war was kicking off, wasn't it?
Yeah, in a big way. And it got worse. The closer we got to jumping on a plane to fly to Austria, the worse it got. And it's when they hit Syria with the chemical weapons, and then the Russian warships were coming down into the Mediterranean. So the logistics were cut off to even try and do this ride. So there was now, because my original plan was to go through Austria, Hungary, Romania, or Bulgaria, go across Turkey, catch the ferry to Cyprus, get another ferry across to Israel, and then ride down through like it was, I don't know what I was thinking, but I was thinking that. And I was just looking at all these locations to put a bike in front of. I didn't really have any idea about the political climate of any of it, other than I knew that we couldn't go through Syria. That's all I knew. I thought, well, we can't go through Syria. We can't go around it because I probably don't really want to go into Afghanistan, either Iraq. I'm not sure geographically what's next. When we came to getting on the plane, everything had happened. They'd ousted the government in Egypt. Syria had been hit with the chemical weapons. All the ferries were stopped. We physically had no means of getting those bikes out of Turkey. And I thought, whatever, we'll just get to the border of Turkey, ride along the coast, see what we can do. And if nothing happens, we'll just ride along the coast, go over to Greece and do some hard enduro just to cap it off. And so it was completely up in the air as to that, like that shot in front of the pyramids. The fact that it even happened is quite ridiculous, considering everything. I mean, you guys have obviously seen the movie. That was the concept, and that's how I did it. I just had these locations in my GPS, punched into the GPS with a day, and I think I'd given myself 21 days to go from Austria down to Egypt. And the funny thing was, the exit point, should have we even made it to Egypt, the offload point and the only contact for KTM was in Sharm el-Sheikh, down near the Red Sea. So you had to actually go through Cairo, went to the pyramids, cross the Suez Canal, and come down into the Sinai. Badlands. Yeah, you've seen the movie.
Yeah. I have a really clear memory. I was cutting the grass one day, and my girlfriend Ashley tapped on the window, opened the window, and said, "Come in, you've got to see this." And she showed me the 5-minute sort of promo film for it.
Yeah, the trailer.
Is it the Temper Trap music?
Temper Trap, yeah.
Man, that is the best 5 minutes of motorbike video. I still watch that probably every month. It's still the film I send to people when I kind of say, look, this is what I'm kind of aspiring to. Look at these shots. There's some beautiful shots in that, Adam, isn't there?
We don't want to get all spooky here, but that Temper Trap song, when this trip was happening, I had that Temper Trap song on headphones just manifesting that preview trailer. I'd needed to go and get and slot these shots in a roundabout kind of way. And that whole Moto Nomad journey, right to the backflip in our riding gear into the Red Sea, to the wheelie in front of the pyramids, it was like that whole Moto Nomad trip was just filling out the scenes for that Temper Trap music.
It's absolutely perfect, isn't it? Our filmmaking friend Greg, one of the worst things you can say to him when he first sort of gives us a sneak preview of one of his films is the worst thing you can say is love the music. Put so much work into it. The music to him is incidental. But I always think it's such an important part of the film, isn't it? And that is a perfect example of the perfect soundtrack for the footage.
Yeah, and it was just that time of, my life was very, we suffered for the sake of what we thought was looking good, because we were off-road racers at the time. On any other day, I was hanging out and riding and training with Toby Price, Daniel Milner, and a selection of Australia's best who were, and not that I was at their level in competition, but I was exposed to them in their prime of riding with them, living with them, hanging out with them, interviewing them, working with them. And so the image of Moto Nomad was all about, it had to be racer. And we suffered for that. We're in motocross helmet, 7,000 kilometers in motocross gear. Idiots. But we didn't know any different either. It was funny. All I organized at home, I had a KTM 300 EXC in Sydney at the time, and I fashioned this tripod holster, because it was all about the camera gear. And even when Mark Portbury, my mate, my sidekick for Moto Nomad, it was so funny. When he flew up to Sydney from Melbourne and we're about to jump on the plane, he had all this stuff and he's got this and he's got that. And I was like the sergeant, the platoon leader. And I just grabbed his stuff, packed all these things. And my camera bag, because I had the big blue backpack and had the drone case and all this shit in it. And he carried the little black compact camera bag, which had the long lens and most of the camera gear in it. And down the back of it, it had this slit for like a laptop. And I just opened the slit and I said, see that? That's what you've got. That's for you. That's for your stuff. We honestly had the riding gear we were wearing, some undies and a pair of pants and a T-shirt and shoes. And that was it. We suffered, but it was all about the film. Don't get me wrong. It's the time of our lives. Actually, Mark's family were trying to stop him from going because it was so obviously hardcore. It had all turned to shit over there.
They just thought it was too dangerous.
Yeah, and even KTM factory were like, "You're on your own, boys. Like, you do realize where you're trying to get to, don't you?" And obviously, they see a lot more than we were in Australia and being a bit closer to it. The way it all happened, and the only reason it happened, is because when we got to Cappadocia, and I just thought that I was just like, you never know unless you go. And I thought, we're going to ride to the border of Turkey and just try and work something out. We're going to get across to Egypt somehow. When we got to Cappadocia, with all the balloons, the air balloon, hot air balloons, and those spiny limestone villages with all the restaurants and things underground, we're at this wacky hotel, and the guy that ran it had a contact down in Iskenderun, which is the farthest southeastern, right on the border of Syria. Like Aleppo was over the hill. He said, when you get there, you need to go see this person. I reckon they'll be able to ship the bikes as cargo, get them as cargo across to Egypt. And so it was all just the hope. All right, it's not over yet. We'll just try this on. We'll do it. And the thing was, as we left Cappadocia and pointed southeast to Iskenderun, the highways just became vacant. We were just two motorbikes going down these big vacant freeways. The closer we got to that bottom corner, you could start to see the big military helicopters. And then when we got closer, every town we got to just started to fill up with tanks. And it was a very heavily militarized part of, you could see that was where it was all beginning.
You didn't think seeing tanks and things heading the same direction as you, maybe now's time to turn around and go back the other way?
Well, they weren't shooting at us. No one was stopping us. It's not like we hit a roadblock and they said, you can't go in here, because there was people living down there. There were Turkish people living down there. And when we got to Iskenderun, it was like a typical seaside town, very well populated, shopping centres and infrastructure and suburbs and restaurants and everything. And there was life bubbling away. But on the intersections and across the road from schools and things would be a full-blown tank just parked in the most random spots. It was a pretty spooky scenario. It took 2 days. We found this guy, organised the logistics of getting these bikes put on to a ship. Like, it actually happened. We didn't think it was going to happen, but they didn't seem to think it was a big deal. It's like, okay, well, all the ferries are shut, but we'll send it as cargo. And none of this was in English, none of it. Just when we thought it was pointless and hopeless, it was happening. And we got given an address and follow this guy. Next thing we know, we're at this customs on the port handing over our bikes. And then they went 3 days before us. We were bikeless in Iskenderun, like pretty vulnerable. Aleppo was like 50 kilometers over the hill right there, the main like hotspot. The whole transfer for us, what it actually was we were put on a private plane, like just a little, charter flight with 40 truck drivers. All the logistics to Iran were cut off through Syria. They had to put their trucks on boats and ship them down to Egypt and then drive across to Iran and Saudi. And so, we just joined in. Didn't even have a ticket. Our name was read out on a list. It was a cool experience, a scary experience, especially getting in the taxi that morning to go, because we actually drove, the airport was right on the border. We're driving literally right on the border of Syria. So here we go. Is this plane just going to get shot out of the sky? It's now or never. And then the rest all just unfolds in the movie. But I'll never try and push my luck like that again.
But as a filmmaker, when all these sort of little obstacles come up, just a little part of you think, actually, this is pretty good. I'm thinking especially about in Australia when you're riding along and the cops come up behind you and the lights go on and you go, for fuck's sake. I wonder how quickly you went from, for fuck's sake, to, this is going to be great in the film.
I don't know. I don't really chase that drama, like crashing and now we've got something worth watching. And with Moto Nomad, geez, once we got down into the Middle East, everywhere you looked, there was machine guns. I was more of the mindset, getting the shot at the pyramids was still more important to me. Getting to Petra in Jordan was still more important to me. Incidentally, we're just organically passing through this whole militarized landscape, and the generation of influencers now would have just reveled in all that, But I don't know, I just had a different look and I don't try to...
I'm not saying you chase it, but at the same time, a small part of the filmmaker side of you must think, this is great.
It does, and it pushes you. Like you'd be less inclined to do a lot of this stuff if not for the footage and even the scenario that unfolded to get inside the pyramid compound. We'd gotten so close, made it that far, and now there's a tank parked in front of the main entry and barbed wire and soldiers, and so we're not getting in there. And yeah, we ended up getting in there. And you would only push that limit. You had this vision in your head that you were so close to getting. Well, let's try and just push a bit further and see what happens.
So we're talking about Moto Nomad 1. There's also a 2 and a 3, dear listener. Now, the first one was Austria to Egypt, as we've been talking about. The second one is Riders of the Steppe, which is Kazakhstan, Mongolia and Russia, possibly my favourite. And then the third one was the Andes, Chile, Bolivia and Argentina. And if you haven't seen all of these films, watch them. They're behind a paywall, but worth every single penny. The guy nearly got killed making these films, so go and watch them. Pay your money. Get on with it. It'd be quite nice to hear some of your story from how you got into bikes and how you went from racer to journalist to huge adventure motorbike filmmaker. People, I can't believe anybody that listens to this podcast hasn't heard of you, but you've got something like 800,000 subscribers on YouTube, 271 videos. You've been making films for over 10 years. Your biggest film has over 29 million views. Crazy numbers, Adam.
I think that one's just stuck on a loop in a bar in Indonesia or something. It doesn't I wish it had some revenue to reflect those numbers, but I'll be brutally honest, that's been my biggest transition to adventure content, is the monetary value. Look, I am getting older, I am coming of age, I do actually love it now, especially the horse whole thing. The transition, if you want to talk about the background of YouTube, my videos used to get millions of views, whatever I put up. And it was just hardcore, two-stroke, enduro, racing sort of oriented videos. The odd bike test and obviously the Moto Nomad stuff. Who knows what that would have turned into if I had to put it all to YouTube. But it worked better for me, and I was... I'm only just getting used to the fact that I'm a YouTuber. I never did it for that back then. I just wanted to make films, and incidentally, they were put on YouTube. It was probably about only 3 or 4 years ago, I just sort of looked up and realized that the videos just aren't getting the numbers anymore. No one gives a shit about all this action and two strokes and racing and all this stuff. And I realized that I had to actually become like a YouTuber. I had to start talking to the camera and putting my face on it and being this kind. It's sort of forced me into this position of being an influencer. I didn't start that way. Sure, I always enjoyed telling a story, but it was the cinematic sense. And I think if you look at Moto Nomad, who knows how that would go if I actually put it onto YouTube. But it's the same. It's like, what if The Rock put his movies on YouTube or Tom Cruise started putting his movies on YouTube? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, they're not, I created them as feature films to be enjoyed in a, not in a swipey, fast digestible platform. And I guess I'm clinging to that format a bit with the Warhorse series, and still struggling to just upload a whole episode of me talking to the camera. And it's not really my style.
Was it an easy transition for you then to do that? Everybody, I think, inherently human, that we don't like the sound of our own voices.
No, it's shit. Like, and that's something that, I've learnt to just disconnect from.
Yeah.
It's funny, actually, because you play stuff back, and especially with you do voiceovers and all that business. In Australia, especially when I first started, Australia is very hard on their own. My stuff only went so big because YouTube's global. As I transitioned out of the magazines, all of a sudden I'm making videos, and I was the only one, the only Australian media guy that's making videos on YouTube. And next thing I'm, this voice that's online, and what the fuck's Reimann doing? You know what I mean? And then next thing, it's millions of views. I've been able to just move on from the whole publishing game, and it's become its own entity. Like, it's what everyone's doing now. Yeah. and the only reason I'm relevant is because I started doing it. Yeah, it was 2009 when I started it. But only the last couple of years have I tried to put more effort into being this influencer. And I've tried a few different things, try and pass on the knowledge. I think if you look at the social media landscape, a lot of real life, honesty, raw material goes big, like life hacks with TikTok, people showing you how to cook something or do something. And I thought, rightio. And in this, probably going to open a can of worms with this adventure bike thing, but isn't it funny how if you looked at motorcycling 10 years ago, because of MotoGP and the numbers, the biggest part of motorcycling was street, because off-road, let's face it, was a niche. So if you look at the whole spectrum of motorcyclists as a whole, street riders outnumbered us in a big way. And over the last few years, I think it's safe to say that some of these adventure bikes are becoming like manufacturer flagships. They're putting all their budget, they're putting all their promo, they're just like hinging their whole brand around these big adventure bikes, right? And I feel like after the whole lockdown thing, when people were trapped, and the way how everything's so regulated and constricted, I feel like people have just gone, you know what? Fuck the GSXR, fuck the Harley. I'm getting rid of this thing. Give us one of those GSs, give us a T7. I want a piece of this adventure thing. The market's gone through the roof, right? And in the process, you're getting all these riders that are very good riders, very experienced, but they've never been off-road before. And their first taste of off-road is on a 200 kilo plus pretend dirt bike. Let's face it, most of them are pretend dirt bikes. And so they try and use them the way they're marketed, and they realize, holy shit, it's like us trying to drive a Formula One car or something, you're not going to just be able to do it. All of a sudden, because I've done some adventures and doing this and doing that, and then thinking, I need more content. I need content. I need a higher frequency. Like these productions that I do, I can't just churn them out once a week, especially if I'm traveling all over the joint. And because I have property here, last year I thought I need to up the frequency. I need to be able to be uploading every week. And that's when I come up with the concept to just start offloading some knowledge, like try and dumb it down and show people some skills and just hand it out freely. Yeah, I did some T7 instructional videos, and one of them blew up. It's just like the most basic thing. And I'm trying to be nice. I'm trying to not be, and I was quite surprised. They think I'm some kind of lord, in terms of off-road. It just shows when we've lived a life of dirt, we can just transition to these adventure bikes like, it's just a big dirt bike. And so what I'm finding is just the more I just be myself and throw out some advice and don't take for granted that people can know how to ride these things, because they don't, and I see it firsthand a lot with a lot of the rallies, and there's an adventure rally in every bloody country every second weekend now. Like, it's just such a huge movement, don't you think? And it's pumping the manufacturers on every level, from the accessories to the tires to the helmets to the gear. People just can't stop spending money on these things. And so I've just organically fumbled my way into a bit of a Chris Birch sort of position I don't claim to be anything, but if I make a video and talk about it, it's like, yes, sensei sort of thing. And I'm not trying to be that guy, but it's just weird. I'll just roll with it.
You've amassed a massive amount of experience, haven't you? And it's worth passing that on. I mean, you think about what was that? Yeah. The kid that set off on the XR600 is a very different person, I would imagine, than.
Yeah, absolutely. And but still true to the core back then. Like, you ride an XR600 across the Nullarbor, that's suffering. You know what the Nullarbor is?
I went across it on the train, and I took a picture on day one, and I took a picture on the last day. It was pretty much the same picture the whole way.
The same, yeah.
Yeah.
We all want to, have that image of adventure on our Instagram or our Facebook, but to really do it and execute these big missions like Moto Nomad 2, 9,000 kilometers we did. We effectively rode our own Dakar and filmed it and lived off the bikes. There were days in Mongolia where we'd long run out of food. You'd have to just get up and put 200 Ks in on the bike before you'd find anyone that even opened their door or window to serve you food. Australia, we have a different time frame of working, up with the sun and let's get into it. Mongolia, they'd go right into the night, and then you can't rock up to a town at 7 a.m. and expect a coffee and breakfast. Those doors aren't even opening. No one's even going to respond to your existence. And so press on another 200 Ks and you haven't eaten a thing and you're tired and you're hungry and you got to stay motivated to film. So it's not just floating around on holidays enjoying myself. A lot of it has been project driven. I've definitely been hardened to it. So it makes a lot of the ins and outs of how to go about it very easy to explain and very easy for me to strip down. And
you are stripped down though, the way you film. It's basically you, and I think the Kazakhstan one, that was you and two mates, right?
Yeah.
You're doing all the filming yourself. Are you still doing all the post-production yourself and everything you do?
Yeah, basically, because trying to build a house, raise a family, so I sort of have to that degree, and there's a bit of a formula. I'll be welding and tiling by day and then editing by night after the kids have gone to bed, and I don't show any of that.
Do you enjoy the editing process, or do you find it a chore, or how do you feel about it?
I really enjoy the visuals, the footage, and with the big adventures, Moto Nomad and all that, they're self-capture. I mean, let's face it. It's what the world is now. Everyone's got their own phone in their face, and there are content creators, and it's actually kind of cool that it's accepted now. It's like, right, it's just a normal thing. So I'll push further into it, but more dynamic, because I've worked out how to make the drones chase me. Your tripod is the ultimate employee. There is no better employee than a tripod, because once you set the shot, it doesn't move. It's up to you. And having that eye for the image that I want to capture and then riding through it and making it look the part, you can kind of work quite efficiently by yourself.
I think that's why your films really stand out, because there's a lot of composition in them, isn't there, which you don't see in many other people's films. It appears that you use long lenses quite a lot.
Because I started in magazines, I learnt photography. So if you're shooting dirt bikes, racing, it's a very aggressive environment to try. You got one chance, And so the action sport element, to try and capture that chaos in one epic scene, it's taught me to set up a really good shot and then press record. As I'm riding, you can ride for 100 Ks and be passing all this stuff, and you could have the camera rolling just talking shit, or you find some epic scene and go, right, I'm going to capture this in multiple angles, put the drone up, get the long lens out. It's a lot of work. Especially when you're in Russia and you're tired and you got to get to that border because your visa's about to run out, but you're creating a story.
What's the longest ride-away shot you've ever done? What's the furthest distance that you've had to go back and retrieve a camera?
There's been a couple just for audio's sake, because there's nothing better than the sound. And it comes back from the racing days when I started shooting, like even in Dakar. If you were to be sitting in the desert and one of the boys comes past on the pipe and they're on a, just a desert road, top gear, and they've left it on and almost till it goes quiet, to hear a bike on song on the pipe until it goes out of distance, out of earshot, and there's no wind noise, it's just, humming away over the horizon. Capturing those sort of things, you've got to do it. You've got to pick a section where, okay, get the camera set up, make sure there's no wind to spoil it, know that you can hold it on that far down there, and a few kilometers.
If someone had told you in 2009 the footage you'd be getting with the drones, it would have blown your mind, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, just the technology. I can't believe we've got access to that level of technology.
Your own little helicopter you could take into the desert to get those shots you would never have got before.
It's a lot harder than just sticking a drone in the air and pressing record because everyone's got one. So you still have to be the photographer. Generally with drones, it's going to look impressive because it's that aerial perspective, but trying to actually get drone footage that stands out and looks different, it all comes back to that photographer's eye on where to put it up, what to capture, how to capture it, and then working with it. You sort of have to slow down a bit. You can't you'll just outrun it, and they crash into trees, and there's a bit on. It's not just like someone's flying it behind you.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to get the hang of it, I think.
I think one of your other differentiators is your very evocative commentary. The whole romanticism of motorcycling is just spot on, really. Do you kind of write those after you've finished editing the film? Do you write them, or do you just sit in front of a microphone and talk?
It depends what the project is. The story writes itself in terms of the ride. I've got a start point. I've got a 2-week window. I want to get to here, and here. And what happens in between creates the story. The Warhorse, the first video in the Arctic Circle, I ran out of fuel because little fuel sensors failed on the old girl, or may not have even worked. I didn't know because I'd filled it up. And next thing, I've run out of fuel on the border of Sweden in no man's land, and these Norwegians got me fuel and invited me back to their place. And boom, you can't script that in. Little scenarios like that, And so how you feel, and then are you behind schedule, ahead of schedule, what you choose to leave out or put in, it all comes down to how much colour you can cram into the journey. If you're under pressure because of the time frame, again, I'm not just a single guy living on bikes floating around the world, raising a family and, creating a life in Australia. A lot of it is very project based, but it's important for me to project the dream as if I'm just floating around traveling on a motorbike.
You do that
which
very
I kind of
well.
am.
Yeah, I'm convinced.
Because when I'm doing it, I love it. I do. It's very lucky. I'll never take that for granted.
Do you find that the harder you work, the luckier you are?
Yeah, well, that's a fact.
What's in the Adam Reimann garage these days?
Got a World Raid. It's Yamaha's bike. It's not mine. Yeah, I'm playing around with the new World Raid. It's a 23 model, 24, they're the same. It's good to have a current model machine to take the pressure off the old Warhorse and just interact at that level, stay connected with the industry. I can ride it a lot harder than I would the Warhorse. Yeah, just work with the different elements. I've done the suspension mods. Basically, I'm taking this World Raid. I'm all about as light as possible, minimal camping gear. So I want to present the ultimate adventure package with this World Raid when it's done, and a comfortable setup for me. I was sort of heading down that road before when I was opening a can of worms about this adventure bike thing, and people having no idea how hard they're making it for themselves and how much better the riding could be if they just leave all that shit off it. Like hard panniers.
Clive, I sent you a film this week, didn't I? We won't say whose it was, but it was pretty much just a very enjoyable 20 minutes of blokes falling off very large GSs.
We even have a T-shirt, Adam, that just says "Big Bike Wanker" on it. we send them to our friends whose bikes are too big to actually do anything interesting off-road on them. It's a theme in our podcast that we're all about lightweight, small bikes.
This is funny. I picked up on that. I've listened to a couple of your podcasts. I listened to Old Mate from Royal Enfield. That was a good one.
That was good.
And then I listened to a couple way back from Norway when we first tried to kick it off. I picked up on the fact that you guys are like the single cylinder lightweight trail guys that like to take the piss out of people riding big, heavy twin-cylinder adventure bikes. Is it because the majority of them that you see are just overloaded caravans that it goes past the point of it's not even motorcycling anymore? It's just this.
For me, it's the trails where we live in the Lake District. It's hilly. It's not mountainous. It's hilly, and some of them are quite technical. So if somebody rocked up on a GS, one of the new GS 1300s, they would and they weren't Poltares or Chris Birch or Adam Reimann, they would destroy that bike within a day.
Yeah.
So it's just a case of, look, just get a CRF, get an EXC, get something small, and you're going to have so much more fun, and not worry about destroying your bike or yourself.
It's the frustration of seeing people make life difficult for themselves when there's another way, which is completely the opposite of that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not holding back anymore on that. I've sort of had a bit of a dig on a couple of my videos here and there, but just trying to educate people more on how much better it can be. And the irony is that if they're stacking the bike up with all that shit in that way, then they're clearly inexperienced and even less able to ride the monstrosity they've made. With the setup that I travel with, whether it's the Warhorse or this World Raid, I could swap bikes with 90% of the people out there and go, now ride this. Here, give us your bike, take this, ride it, go and camp somewhere. Find what you need in those panniers. I guarantee you'll have a great ride and you will survive. Just see, what I'm fascinated as to what people are putting in these big suitcases, metal suitcases.
We've got a friend called Luggage John. We did sort of some big European road trips on the road rather than pre-TET days. And not only did he bring along a camping chair, but he also brought a table.
And he had an axe, a water purification kit. We're in mainland Europe, not cutting down any trees, not purifying our water, but it all had to come.
That's the first I've heard, a table. You know who's to blame? It's old mate Charlie and Ewan when they did the long way around. They sold that image of adventure to the world, which is probably why there's a million GS riders out there with steel boxes, and you've got a GS with a top box, don't you, Noel? I bet you've got a top box.
I almost afford the bike. There's no way I could afford the top box to go with it. Adam, don't do down your writing because there's some real gems in it. And I never do this. I wrote one down. I loved it so much where you said there's nothing quite like being propelled across the planet beyond your natural running speed. I'd never heard it kind of described that way. And I just thought that was a brilliant way of putting it. So there's some real gems in there. Keep doing it.
I don't know. It just comes out. I mean, when you've got a short window to get a message across, it forces a bit of creativity. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Every now and then the combination comes together. And again, I don't think too much of it once they go live, like it's the work's done, boom, okay, next project. But every now and then a video will come up from a year or 2 years ago and I'll just sit because it's fresh again. It's like I'm now the audience. And I'll look back at some of the videos and go, fuck, that was good.
Yeah.
I'm actually slightly impressed.
Yeah.
In terms of the result, it's more like it's worth putting the effort in.
Yeah. Adam, you're coming to the ABR festival in the UK this year, I believe.
What's all the fuss about? What's this ABR festival?
Bring a disguise, Adam. That's my only advice. Bring a disguise.
Basically, it's 10,000 people in a couple of fields right in the Midlands.
No, it looks pretty epic. I've seen a couple of videos and, yeah, it looks awesome.
Chris Birch was there last year and he couldn't walk more than about 3 or 4 feet before people were coming up for selfies. So you're going to feel like an absolute fucking legend for a couple of days.
Yeah, you're going to be like a very handsome man with a puppy. You're not going to be able to walk like 10 feet without somebody wanting something.
Based on some of my comments on YouTube, I think it's going to be very hard to stay sober. There's about 15, 16 comments already that are talking about they owe me a beer or something. No, looking forward to it, but just because of how into it everyone is in the UK. Like, it's for such a small country, there's so many, like the dirt bike, I think it all stems from dirt bike riders as well. And you've obviously got a big street community with the Isle of Man up the road, just nutters. The English are nutters on bikes across the board.
I would say the same about Australians.
We've got a very diverse playground.
We've got a thing called the Trail Riders Fellowship, the TRF, which you may have heard of. They've been around since about 1970, I think they started.
The fellowship. Sounds very English.
It's been a really important institution in trail riding for Britain, because it's basically you pay your membership and they fight every legal battle where councils are trying to close lanes, as we call them here. So they're a really valuable organisation. And I think there's something like 9,000 members now, which is incredible. It's grown massively in the last few years. But that gives you some idea of the size of trail riding population over here.
And that's pretty cool that the fellowship is actually protecting the riding areas and armed with the, I don't know, knowledge to do so, or the people on board with that's pretty good. In Australia, we've got so much of it. And I'm sort of tapering out of the racing as years go on. Being an adventure bike rider, it doesn't matter. It's just like, well, can't ride there. I'll go and do 7,000 Ks in that direction, and it's huge. We've got like the centre of Australia might as well be Africa,
Are there still big epic rides in Australia that you've yet to do, that you want to do?
Oh, there's plenty, yeah. And not so much bucket lists, the typical ones that I must do. It's a lot of the rides that I do. It was good the Warhorse ones in Europe, because I utilised bits and pieces of the TET. Them would just be in completely random locations, just sticking to that original, finding waypoints with Google Earth and going, yeah, check that, I've got to get the bike in there somehow, letting the adventure unfold. You could do that for years in Australia.
The TET really has revolutionised riding in the UK and Europe. A friend of ours, John, almost single-handedly created it with the help of a linesman in every single country.
It's amazing.
And that has helped dirt bikes or adventure biking grow massively in the UK and in Europe.
And it's helped in the sense of, if you've only got a short window, to be able to target the stuff that you may not otherwise find. And it's not like you have to just sit on the TET, but if you can aim for it and utilise little bits and pieces and hop on and off it and go here and go there, it really helps you pull together as a foreigner, and you've got 5 days in that country. Even the second part where I rode from Norway to London, I utilised a bit of the TET just to put me into the middle of all the stuff, and then I was just free ranging and ended up green lanes.
Yeah. The way you describe it there, that's the perfect way to use it. And I see a lot of people who they're obsessed with doing the TET, from all across the country and not deviating from it. But I think the way you describe it there, where you just make the best of it and make it fit in with another kind of trip that's going on at the same time, that's the best way to get the most out of it. Yeah,
exactly. If you've only got and you can just zoom in and go, oh yeah, and you get a feel for what the track is. It's like, screw this bit, I'm just going to duck across the border there and go into that.
So what is next for Adam Reimann and Motology Films?
There's a bit on this year. Obviously the ABR festival. I'm in talks with a manufacturer I'm not just going to fly into the UK, drink beers with you boys and fly out. I'm going to try and use it as an opportunity to get some content. So I'm just finalising bike and logistic now. But before that, there's some stuff on. It's boring that I'm not telling you what's happening. But I need to...
Is that because you don't know if it's going to happen, or you just don't want to tell us?
It'll spoil the surprise.
It's just easier to go under the radar with a lot of this stuff. What else can I tell you?
I have this thing where I don't tell people what I'm going to do, because I always think that jinxes it. It's not going to happen if you talk about something too much. Generally, doesn't happen. Best not to talk about it.
I don't like talking about something until I'm doing it.
Does it involve riding motorbikes?
It does. Rolling up to this festival on a motorcycle as everyone else would. blending in with the good folk of the ABR.
It wouldn't seem right you turning up in a Ford Escort, would it, to ABR Festival?
Thanks for inviting me on for the 100th episode.
Really appreciate it. Been a couple of years in the making, but we got there in the end.
I look forward to having a beer with you boys. You're like the only two people I'll know at the festival.
There's about 12,000 other people who'll be desperate to have a beer with you. You'll be fine. Well, there we go. That's our 100th episode. We're still trying to line up another couple of guests, but we'll play it by ear and get them on as soon as we can. A massive thanks to Adam from joining us all the way from Western Australia. That was a very enjoyable couple of hours that we spent chatting to him, and we look forward to seeing him at the ABR in June. Oh, one more thing. Noel asked me to tell you that the film was The Place Beyond the Pines. I seem to remember it being a bit dull, but it's got 78% on Rotten Tomatoes, so I might watch it again. Anyhow, see you next time. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate your support. Don't forget you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you really appreciate what we do, you could consider supporting us on Patreon or buy us a coffee. Links are available on our website, which is tampodcast.com, tampodcast.com, where we also have a limited selection of branded stuff. But either way, please keep listening and spreading the word. See you next time.